we're so pleased to be speaking to you, and obviously what we're concerned about is to find out about the situation that Pussy Riot are in and do what we can to help. So could you guide us on that, please?
Yeah, well, the trial is now finished. They were arrested at the beginning of March. They've been in custody since then, and they've not been allowed to, two of them have got young children, they've not been allowed to see their children. They're a couple of hours away from the centre of Moscow, and Nadia, one of the women, she's also been banned from seeing her husband because he'd been leading protests against her. So at the moment they're remaining in custody awaiting the judge's verdict, which is due this Friday at 3 o'clock Moscow time, so that's midday UK time. Now, having been in the court for a couple of days, I'm not entirely convinced that we'll get the verdict at 12 o'clock because nothing quite went according to plan when I was over there, but that's when it's expected. And there are very few acquittals in the Russian criminal system. It's about 1% of cases ending in acquittal, whereas in the UK, I think it's about 56% would result in conviction, so 56% compared to 99%. So most, it's almost like taken for granted they're going to be convicted. The prosecution have asked for a 3-year prison sentence, so that's really what we're hoping that the judge will be more lenient than that, and whatever sentence they get, it'll be something that allows them to leave jail on Friday.
What do you think? Is it possible to give any indication whatsoever of what might realistically happen to Pussy Riot?
It's just very difficult to second guess. I mean, the offence with which they were charged, which was a very strange old offence under old church laws from the 10th century.
Sorry, did you say Kerry, did you say the 10th century?
I think they're saying the 10th century, yes, so it's not something that people have recently been charged with. It's a strange crime of hooliganism motivated by religious hatred. So the trial sort of hinged on whether, as the prosecution said, it was all about being anti-religion, or as the women said, the defendants said, it was a political protest. And it was very clear to me that it was a political act. The song that they performed, they only performed 40 seconds of it, but it was basically calling on Virgin Mary to join forces with them and help chase. It was called Virgin Mary Chase Putin Out. And yet the prosecution said in court, well, it wasn't a political protest because they didn't mention any politicians' names. So anyway, the offence that they've been charged with, rather than something like you might expect a order offence that you'd get in the UK, is this old 10th century church law of hooliganism. It carries a maximum 7-year sentence, but the prosecution have asked for 3 years. And it's impossible to judge whether there's also different factors at play. Some people say that it's Putin that ultimately decides, it's not the judge that really has a say over it. Others say that the judge will want to show that she's independent from the politicians. Certainly the feeling in the courtroom was that the judge wasn't very sympathetic at all to their case. She didn't allow them to call defence witnesses. She didn't allow the defence lawyers to cross-examine the prosecution witnesses. But with the international attention that it's had, with everyone from Madonna downwards highlighting the case, I don't know whether that means that the Russians the authorities will be more determined to show that they're cracking down, or whether they sort of want to go for a face-saving measure that basically, some people say that a likely scenario is the women would be given enough of a sentence that they'd have to serve a few more months in jail. But with the time they've already served, they'd be out before the end of the year. But that's just guesswork. Nobody really knows.
You said that they were unable to call defence witnesses. I don't understand that.
The only witnesses they were able to call were, it was meant to be 3 character witnesses, but one of them, I think, couldn't be found at the time that they were actually called, or had gone missing from the court or something. So basically, 2 of the women had character witnesses. Marcia, for example, her former teacher came along and said she was a very nice girl and she was a vegetarian and she's worked hard, and that was it. They weren't allowed, the whole case hinged on this interpretation of the religious law, but they weren't allowed to call witnesses to actually give an opinion on what the law meant. So there were all sorts of points being made about whether turning your back on the altar is an offence and things like that. And when you look at the prosecution witnesses, there were some slightly dubious experts that they called, and they weren't allowed to challenge what they were saying either. So it was very, very one-sided. One of the features of the court system there, which in some ways I think is quite a good fact, but you had a prosecuting lawyer, but then you also had 3 lawyers representing the so-called victims of the women, and there were 9 people that were classed as victims who'd actually either seen the performance or seen footage of it afterwards and said that they'd been traumatised by it. So you actually have them presenting the case as well as the prosecuting lawyer. And you can sort of see in the UK, actually, it's something that's been discussed for rape victims, because if you're a rape victim and you come along to court, you're not, the prosecuting barrister doesn't represent you, the defence lawyer doesn't represent you, and you're sort of slightly left on your own and don't get much support. So I think in some ways it's quite a good thing, but it does mean that it's very heavily weighted toward, there was a lot of focus on presenting the prosecution and the victim's case, and then virtually nothing from the defence side. They just weren't able to do it.
I mean, to me, it sounds like a farce.
Yeah, I mean, there were very strange elements to it. So, as I said, the prosecution insisted it wasn't political because politicians' names weren't mentioned when the song was called Chase Putin Out. But, the victim's lawyer, one of the victim's lawyers, who was actually a woman, she said something to the effect that they ought to be in jail anyway because they weren't Orthodox Christians, which is a bit bizarre considering that Russia for a long time was an officially atheist state. But she also said that feminism is a mortal sin. So there's all sorts of issues that are brought up for debate around this. It's partly, it's not just about that full performance, it's about whether being feminist, being atheist, being, out of the mainstream, being punks, being performance artist is acceptable in Russia, or protesting in any form is acceptable, and to what extent being like that will be tolerated in Russia. So I think that's why it's finally got so much attention, and why people are beginning to realise the importance of it is that it's not just about whether it's wrong and silly to do a performance in a church for 40 seconds before they were asked to leave and they did leave, and people kept asking me when I was over there what would happen if you did it in the UK, and the closest thing I could draw a comparison with was when Peter Tatchell interrupted the Archbishop of Canterbury's sermon. He's going back about, I think, more than 20 years, it was in the 1990s. He jumped in with a protest about gay rights, and he was fined £18, so for breach of the peace or public order or something like that. So I think there's quite a big difference between that and actually facing a substantial prison sentence. I just can't see how the position of the authorities is justified at all. I think that's what most people think. They're surprised the fact that this charge was used in the first place, the way the trial has been conducted, the way the women have been treated. I mean, it's been very long days in court, and on the Monday, for example, the women had arrived at court at 8 o'clock. That would have meant leaving the jail before 6 o'clock in the morning, and the court hearing was from 10 through to about 9:30 at night. And they weren't fed while they were at court, and then they would have had to go back, make the journey back in the evening. So they were complaining they were getting 2 or 3 hours sleep a night. They weren't having any time to talk to their lawyers. They were too tired to look at the court papers. They were hungry as well. But the amazing thing is actually they didn't seem that downbeat by it. They still had the sort of fire, if you like. I mean, they made, again, it's something I think that's to be commended about the Russian system, is they did get to make closing speeches, whereas if you were on trial in the UK, you would only be allowed to answer questions from the lawyers. So they made these brilliant closing speeches, which have gone viral and are being translated, and they're being performed at the Royal Court Theatre on Friday, actually, by actresses. But it was just amazing to see that their spirit and the fact that they were still determined to fight. And some of the things they said, they were sort of saying, even if you keep us in jail, we're freer than you are because we know that we can say what we think and you can't. Things like that are very powerful. We've got to hope, if they are convicted, then there's a possibility of an appeal or going to the Court of Human Rights. But I think just when this first came up, and I sort of read about it on a music website, and I found it very difficult to get people to pay attention. I think it was because people just sort of saw that, there was women wearing the balaclavas and the brightly coloured dresses, doing the can-can in the church, and they just sort of thought, this is like a silly season story, and they don't realise, for a start, just how badly they've been treated and what the consequences they're facing is out of all proportion to what they did. But also, as I said, the other issues that it throws up, and I met quite a few of their supporters while I was out there, and quite a few of those have actually been in prison for short periods in recent times because of supporting the campaign. And I think it is a sort of very much a watershed moment in terms of how the Russian authorities are going to treat this sort of dissent.
What do you think is the best thing that we can do to support the situation at the moment? And
I think it's just between now and Friday, the more public attention, the better. I mean, Amnesty have got a petition that you can either sign by text or sign online. So they've been declared prisoners of conscience by Amnesty International. There are lots of events going on Friday. Globally, there's a lot of different cities having events. As I said, there's the event at the Royal Court Theatre in London on Friday morning. I know Leeds is having an event. I know that Brighton's having an event. So there's quite a few things that people can join. There's sort of flash mob type events going on and things like that. So I think just the more it's important that Russia knows that the world is watching and waiting to see what the outcome is. So in the short term, we have to see what the outcome is on Friday and then decide what else can be done. I think in the short term it really is about just making sure that everyone is aware of it and is on board and is supporting the women.
Well, Kerry, we certainly do, wholeheartedly, and we'll do as much as we can. And Kerry, I was wondering, would you be so kind as to have another chat with us so that we can maintain an up-to-date position and keep getting this information out there? Would that be okay?
I'm sure that would be fine.
That would be brilliant. And thank you so very, very much indeed. It's been brilliant. Not at all.
Okay.
And please do count on us. Thank you, Kerry.
Great. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.